Hello, everyone. I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet. This is Ken Weep from Sportsnet. We are Kenny and Renny, and this is the Kenny and Renny post-game show. And yes, I know what you're thinking. We usually are here after a Jets game, but we thought we were going to keep this thing going, and we wanted to make sure that we were covering everything off on all angles, made sure that we had not only our analysis on this series, but analysis from some of the people who follow this team closest. So we're going to try and do that throughout this series. Try and bring Eric Engels, our man in Montreal, on the show, as I'll be working with him in Montreal. I'll be heading out there for games 3 and 4. We're also going to bring in a real good friend of mine, a guy I absolutely love spending time with, Jason York, who used to do the color commentary for the Habs games when Sportsnet still had the local broadcast. You know what? Why wait any longer? Let's bring in our guy, Jason York. Yorkie, how are you doing, my friend?
Pretty good, guys. Just got to center my camera here.
Yeah.
Right on the screen here. Good. What are
we
you
do everything on the fly.
We have good news. Technical difficulties is our specialty on this show, Yorkie. So you're fitting right in.
There we go. No,
how are you doing, my friend?
Fellas? I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, no, it's been a long time.
Yeah, so we always, what have you been up to? How's this year been? I know you were here in Winnipeg a couple of times. I love the video you posted of Har and Ryan that one cold Winnipeg winter day. I'd been texting him before that day, and I said, you better be prepared. It's really cold in Winnipeg. And he said to me, oh, you know what? It gets cold in Calgary. I'll be fine. And then you posted that video, and I was so glad you did, because as a Winnipegger, you get kind of insulted when people suggest they know what cold is compared to how it is in Winnipeg. So love that video. Good stuff. Loved your work in Winnipeg this year. But let's get down into it. We usually love to start this show just kind of with everyone's take on what they saw today. So what did you see out there, Yorkie?
You know what? The start of that game, I thought Montreal came out and really played well. And then after that, I think Vegas just slowly started taking that game over. And for a while there, when it was a 2-goal game, and Vegas had a couple of those power plays and they didn't score, and then Caulfield got that goal, I thought we were going to have a hockey game, guys. And then the thing with Vegas, and this is for people that don't get a chance to see them that often, they just wear you down. And I think they're just a different beast. And for the Montreal Canadiens, they're a counterpunch team. And who do you shut down if you're Philip Deneau? What assignment do you have for this game? Because from my perspective, I look at a guy like Alex Tuch, and he could have arguably been the best player on the ice. I look at their defense. I look at Mark Stone, who didn't have any points, but he still had like 3 beautiful plays. I think if Carey Price doesn't make some of those saves in the middle of that game, it probably is a lot higher of a score than it was at the end. So Price did what Price did, but how about Marc-Andre Fleury? He made a couple sneaky saves in that game as well.
Oh, yeah.
I thought he had a very quiet but efficient game. And for Vegas, to the point I was saying earlier, they're just so deep. Even that fourth line, and I'm going to tell you, as a former defenseman, when I got a guy like Carrier and the big number 10 out there, and then Ryan Reeves, like, you just don't get a break. Every single puck is going deep, and then your head is in the glass each and every time. So they're a different animal. They're fast. They're big. They finish hits, and they forecheck as good as anybody in the NHL. And that's why they're in the Final Four. They're just, to me, they're the most complete team, I think, that's still remaining in the playoffs right now.
Ken, what'd you see?
Yeah, I mean, Yorkie touched on a lot of things. I loved what I saw from the Vegas D today. Obviously, very active. Their gaps were outstanding. And Marc-Andre Fleury, I agree, had to be really good early. Brendan Gallagher with doing what Brendan Gallagher does, getting involved around that blue ice a few times early on to kind of try to get Fleury off his game. But really, it's a typical weathering of the storm for Vegas, and then they found their game and got that goal, and then they really found themselves. I mean, good goaltender helps you get your legs underneath you when you're not playing your best, and in the second and third, Vegas really elevated. And man, their fourth line, both teams have such great size on their fourth line, but especially Vegas. I mean, Reeves, Colasar, and Carrier, all really involved. I think that, obviously the Canadiens, one thing that we'll dig into, Yorkie, because we have you here, I mean, man, it's such a unique dynamic. Vegas is, that you can double up with Theodore and Petro and Montreal is a little bit reluctant to play Gustafsson right now. They really miss Petrie on the back end. And, man, Sherratt played so much. And then Weber, dealing with the hand, maybe, I don't want to call it an injury, but it looks like an ailment. I mean, man, they sure need Petrie back in that next game. But you're right. They're so relentless on the forecheck. And, man, Alex Tuch, you're right. Probably the best player on the ice tonight. And he's got such great speed. And his game has evolved so much. Yeah. And he's added that physical nature. He's always had the offensive gifts, but he really has embraced a third line role because he knows he's going to play a lot in the third line. Some teams, your third liner kind of gets, like Josh Anderson tonight. He started really well and then kind of went a little bit quiet in the middle. And I thought that the discipline or lack thereof for Montreal in the second really got them off their game because they got out of their fourth line rhythm and they never really kind of found it after that.
To your point, just a little bit on that fourth line and Montreal's fourth line, I think, has been impressive all playoff long. But there's one difference, and it's a big difference between those two fourth lines. Montreal's got that veteran savvy. You got a lot of guys that have been there. They've done that. You got Stahl. You got Corey Perry. But they don't play with a lot of pace. And on the forecheck, they're not going to win a lot of foot races to loose pucks. So if I'm a defenseman going back for a puck, I'm not as I guess, hesitant to make a play because I know I have a little more time versus when I got Ryan Reeves chasing me down, I know I don't have a lot of time to make a play. So it's going to probably make me hurry up what I want to do a little bit more. And I saw that, Sean, in the game tonight. I just saw the Montreal's defense. They're really pressured, having to make time. And to your point with Sherratt, and I was watching that game and I was about to tweet it out, he played way too much. But what else are they going to do? They have no other choice. The Weber hand injury, and boy, like you said, the Petrie injury is massive for the Montreal Canadiens.
Well, here's the thing I thought was interesting because right at the start of the game, they went fourth line on fourth line, and the Canadiens' fourth line was grinding the heck out of them. And I thought that Reeves line, along with Keegan Kolesar, I thought that two Winnipeg boys, I thought that they looked a little bit lost. And then at some point, Pete DeBoer switched over and started putting that line against Josh Anderson's line. And all of a sudden, things really opened up for Vegas. What did you think of kind of the in-game adjustments made by the coaches, Ken? Because I really thought that Pete DeBoer got the best of them.
Well, I mean, it's easier to do when you're playing with the lead for sure. I do think that he did. It's back to what Yorkie was saying. I mean, it's really interesting. Eric Engels talked about how Philip Deneau is kind of the key for Montreal in the series, and he's right. But, I mean, do you play him against Stevenson? Or, I mean, do you play him? Some nights the Karlsson line is so dominant for Vegas that you kind of want to get him against him. So you're it's a pick your poison situation. And I just think that the Canadiens really got out of the rhythm in the second period. Kotkaniemi, I thought, was really physical early, and then that line kind of quieted down as the game went on, and they couldn't really recover. I mean, Gallagher, again, the way that he was able to initiate the contact with Carrier along the boards, I mean, he kind of grabbed onto him, and then Carrier was just stronger than him. He just kind of threw him aside and kind of drew that offensive zone penalty. That was so smart, right. And that really opened up the gates for Montreal, right? I mean, the other thing, too, I mean, we can't ignore it. I mean, Caulfield got the goal, but at 5-on-5, that line wasn't as noticeable as we'd noticed them against the Jets. I liked Suzuki's game. I thought he had a couple great chances early, but in the middle of the game, that line was a little bit quiet. And, I mean, part of that is because the Vegas D is so strong, but they need that line to really be going because we know that they're not – I mean, yes, they have depth, but they don't have a ton of top-end scoring talent. So if that line's not going, it's tough. Even with depth, it's tough to get them really rolling.
Okay, here's what stood out to me most in that game. When we covered, Ken, that Montreal Canadiens versus Winnipeg Jets series, and Yorkie, I'm sure you were paying attention to that, Paul Maurice said every single game that the game plan was to get to the front of the net. And Vegas did that at will tonight. So, Yorkie, from what you saw, and you touched on it, you touched about how stretched the D were, and I totally agree. Jeff Petrie being missing is a really big hole when you're trying to have that top four kind of big bruising Montreal Canadiens guys to keep them out of there. But was this a failure on the Canadiens' part tonight in keeping those guys getting from the net, or is this just what Carey Price is going to have to get used to for the rest of this series?
Well, I think number one, you got to look at Montreal Canadiens lineup, and Ken touched on it. You got Kotkaniemi down the middle. Was he a second or third year player? He looks like he's 15 years old. He's had a great playoff. No disrespect for him, but you're asking an awful lot out of some very young players. It's just a situation Montreal's in right now. Nick Suzuki is a second-year pro. He's a second-year pro, and then you've got Caulfield, who played college hockey this year.
Yeah.
Let's be honest here. You're facing a Vegas team where they're so deep. You got a second line that could arguably be a first line on many teams with William Karlsson and Marchessault and how about Riley Smith tonight? Like, how good was he in this game? So, we can say that Phillip Danault is going to be a key to the series, but if you're Phillip Danault, you got to produce some offense too. Like, you can't just be a shutdown guy when you're on the ice at the end of the game. And no disrespect to him, he's had a great playoff, but he just seems a little bit lost in a game like this because he doesn't, as I said earlier, he doesn't really have an assignment. Like, who's he going to check? Who's he going to go after? There's just too many weapons on the Vegas Golden Knights. So for Montreal, they got to get a lead. Tonight they did, and if they don't, they're going to be in trouble this series. They got to get a lead. They're going to have to rely on their goaltender.
So, Ken, the other part is sorry, Ken, because I'm going to go somewhere I know you'll want to go. The other part of getting guys to the front of the net, it's one thing, but you got to be able to get the puck through. And here's something that I thought that the Canadiens looked like they were nowhere near shutting down Vegas's shooting lanes tonight. How did they open them up so wide? Because in the last series, and even don't just count the Winnipeg Jets, count the Toronto Maple Leafs as well. They could not get pucks through on this Montreal team, and Vegas did it at will tonight.
Yeah, two quick things. They're so good at getting side-to-side movement. I mean, the goal by Martinez is just outstanding. I mean, Theodore has looks like everyone loads up to try to block the shot. Theodore with the rare fake clap hits the ice and then feeds the one-timer. Theodore was just on the Zoom call saying, I was planning on shooting, but Martinez was yelling so loudly that I had to pass it over. It was a classic moment. He's like, man, I got a clear clapper from the high slot. I'm going to take this all day long. But he said Martinez was yelling so loudly that he had no choice but to pass. And I mean, even too, look at, you talk about Riley Smith, York. I mean, what a play on the Holden goal. I mean, he basically froze everybody to him and then rips it over. And then Price, he even delayed enough that Price thought he might actually go backdoor instead of shooting. I mean, that was a kind of a bizarre play, but man, the activation of the Vegas D and their ability to take care of the neutral zone. Sean, what we saw throughout that Winnipeg series, the Jets had so much trouble in two areas: the exits from their own zone and then the entries. Man, Montreal does such a great job of standing up the blue line, but Vegas did such a good job of chipping and chasing and getting by and attacking with speed and transition, and the Jets never got up to speed against Montreal. And I'm not saying that the Canadiens are going to struggle with that all series long, but that's an adjustment they're going to have to make because they finally found a team that could penetrate their blue line, and it caused some problems. And man, they did a great job of keeping the puck away from Price too. I mean, we saw the Jets tried to go to the dump-in route, but Price is so good playing the puck that the exits were so clean in that series, and it was really interesting. And Vegas really kind of took it to them in those fronts after they kind of found their legs.
Hey, Ken, did you notice, just going back to that Winnipeg series, and listen, I'm on the record, guys, as well. I had Winnipeg going to the final. I thought it was going to be their year. I loaded up them in my hockey pool. So I know we got a lot of Jets people watching this game, but man, oh man, I feel for the Winnipeg fan base. But to your point, and I noticed that just going back to that Jets series, you're right. Like, they never chipped pucks and created foot races with Montreal's defense, because if you think if there's one weakness to Montreal's defense, they've got some guys, they're big, strong guys. But if you got to make a guy turn and chase a puck, like how many times in that series, I know Ehlers loves to pull up and do that button hook, but that D-men love that. You want to pull up? Great. I don't have to turn around and get the puck. Same thing with Kyle Connor. They just did it over and over again. Then a guy like Lowry, when he would finally get on the ice, he'd chip it in, and that's why he had success in that series. They just didn't have enough of those foot soldiers doing those types of things. And Vegas, they do it at every line. Pat Chiaretti's chipping pucks. Mark Stone's chipping pucks. And Alex Tuck's probably the only guy that doesn't, because he'll just beat you wide, and he'll take it right down to the goal line and challenges. So they're a fun team to watch. But in saying that, to your point, Kenny, they're still a very simple game. They play similar to Montreal, where they don't make a lot of mistakes, and they put the puck in good areas, and they don't beat themselves. So very calculated game tonight by the Vegas Golden Knights.
Their puck management is so good, right? I mean, that's the big thing. The Jets' puck management was poor, both in the D zone and in the neutral zone, but Vegas does such a good job of not turning pucks over and feeding the transition, and that's where the Canadiens can really attack you.
I want to talk about coaching quickly here. We touched on it a little bit before, but I wanted to get, because this was one of the interesting and funny things that we saw when Paul Maurice was doing his season-ending avail, how he talked about the day after, or the next morning after Vegas knocks off Colorado, he gets a call from his great friend Pete DeBoer, who's kind of like looking and picking up information from him. You were watching Pete DeBoer's post-game conference, and he'd said something, and you were like, "Well, I wonder where he picked that up from." How much of a scouting report and how much of an advantage do you think Pete DeBoer and Paul Maurice's relationship was heading into Game 1 of that series?
For sure. And I mean, I wanted to jump on the Zoom call and talk about that a little bit, about how they got to won the Battle of the Paint and did all the things that the Jets were unable to. I mean, the things that would have been in the Jets' game plan, but they never got around to getting to just because they were unable to execute. Man, the scouting report certainly helped, but just the preparation from Vegas. And the thing that is so great about Vegas, they've been pumping guys in and out of the lineup. I mean, Janmark was out with an injury for a while with that, and then, Patrick Brown is coming in, or, Cody Glass has played in the playoffs. On the back end, Nicholas Hague would be playing for almost any other team, right? And now Nick Holden, here's a guy, Nick Holden was on waivers this year, played only 17 games. Nick Holden is not an offensive player, but speaking of playoff pools, Yorkie, I mean, Nick Holden is the classic. You get him in about the 22nd round, and here he is with two goals and 7 points. So the guy who only played 17 games in the regular season, anybody in the NHL could have had him for free, but he's such a good pro that when the games matter, the coach knows that he can lean on him. And I love those kind of stories, those guys in the periphery of the roster that, instead of getting frustrated, we know it's a frustrating situation, they stay ready and then contribute. So every team needs those guys. I liked Romanov's game early. That hit that he had early in the game, just absolutely outstanding.
Oh, yeah. Alex Tuck?
Yeah, it was on Tuck. It was just a great hit.
It was Petrangelo, guys.
Sorry, it was on Petrangelo.
It
was on Petro when he jumped up. Yeah, good eyes there. He did. I mean, I've been confused as to why he hadn't been in the lineup previously, personally, but it was also interesting too. I mean, I'd be curious for your take. Obviously, unlucky break for Montreal on the Janmark goal. Great job of going to the net by Janmark. Good enough box out by Kulak there, or did he need to seal a little bit better on that goal?
I think Kulak will be out of the lineup next game. I think that game right there, he didn't do a good enough job. And right now, that coaching staff, they're not going to take Gustafsson out of the lineup because they need him for the power play. He's done a nice job there. And I don't think they can take Romanov out of this lineup. It's going to be a physical series. And early on, he had the hit. He made a couple mistakes in his own zone, but the guy competes. And being here in Ottawa, about 2 hours from Montreal, there is a huge cry from the media and the fan base to have Romanov in the lineup every single game. Like, they love this guy. And what's not to love? The guy plays hard. He's young. And I look at this team. It's valuable experience that he's going to gain as a pro. I think Montreal, listen, it's one game. I don't think this series is over by any means, but this is a golden chance to get a guy like that, valuable playoff experience. Montreal's playing with house money right now. They really are. Are they the favorites to win this series? No, they're not. I think a guy like that should be playing. Cole Caulfield's a top prospect. He's playing, deservedly so. Don't forget, there's guys sitting out, like Thomas Tatar is not playing, so Cole Caulfield could be in the lineup. So I'm sure you could sit a Brett Kulak to like, what are you losing by playing a Romanov? I say look for that change next game, and I liked his game a lot.
Yeah, me too. And Caulfield too. I mean, 40th goal of the year at the various levels that he's played at. Just exceptional. And I love the nose for the net element. some young guys, Yorkie, would be frustrated. He had that first chance from a little bit sharper angle, kind of missed the net a little bit, but he went right back to the spot knowing that Toffoli was going to free up in the slot, and you knew he was going to bury the next one. I love that about Caulfield. He's got a nose for the net. The puck always seems to kind of travel around, follow him around the ice, but that's because he knows where to be. I mean, I love that part of his game. Of course, he needs to clean some things up defensively. He's a young guy. Almost all young players do. But, man, he gives them that kind of dynamic element that is kind of lacking, even though they have some really good players in that lineup.
Yeah, he's a special he's a special player, too. Just to finish the thought on what Kenny's saying, I watched him play at rookie development camp, and he didn't get a goal. And I was like, wow, is this guy really the first rounder? And then I've seen the progression to now. He does some special things out there, guys, especially on the power play when he's got time and space. This kid's going to be a star.
I'm glad we got you here, Yorkie, because we got a color analyst, perfect guy to talk about this. On two of those goals that Vegas scores, on the Martinez goal and the Holden goal, you get the entire Montreal Canadiens defense heading in the wrong direction. And I always wonder how, you can get a breakdown of it, but things went wrong when all the Montreal Canadiens are heading in one direction and the puck comes the other way, and then guys are wide open. It looked to me like it was over-aggressive. Now, were the Canadiens doing something different in that game, or were they off on their assignments, or are Vegas doing something to catch them that, Toronto and Winnipeg weren't able to do in this kind of flooding every man towards the puck kind of mentality?
Well, I think number one, it's the playoffs. You're going all out each and every shift, and were they over aggressive? Well, I think we got to give credit to Theodore on the one play. Like, that was one heck of a fake that he made, and then you look at some of the passes; those were some very high skill plays. And a lot of times you'll say, as a defenseman, or if you're a player in the D zone, if we're going to let them score, it's going to be on a hell of a play. It's going to be a hell of a pass that's going to beat us, because we're going to be aggressive. We're going to eliminate time and space. So sometimes you just got to give credit to the opposition. And I think Vegas just made some tremendous plays in the offensive zone, not to mention a couple of the plays that didn't go for them. The Pacioretty pass to Mark Stone, like, that was a highlight save by Price. And then Stone over to Marchessault, like that. It was obvious. They know they're going to have a hard time beating Price on a shot he can see, and he doesn't have to reset. So they were going east to west a lot of times, side to side. The Price is just so good. Like that save on Marchessault reminded me a lot of that save on Scheifele in the series where he came across. 2018. If Scheifele scores, there was actually another one this year, guys, in game one. Yep. The blocker save. If that goes for Scheifele, that could have been a different hockey game. If he scores there, the game's a closer game. Maybe Scheifele doesn't get suspended. Maybe it's a different play. But that's the thing. That's the thing. Carey Price, he makes saves that he's not supposed to make, and he made at least 3 or 4 tonight, guys. And as I said earlier, this game could have been. The score wasn't really indicative of where it could have been. Like, Montreal really didn't have any real good scoring chances until probably the last 5. They had a couple here and there, but you just knew the game was never in doubt, and a lot of that's due to Price.
Yeah.
Ken, what did you go on?
Sorry, Anderson had that really good net drive when he used his speed to go wide, but you're right. I mean, in that middle frame, they really had almost nothing going at all, and yeah, I mean, March so buzzing, and I mean, Stone just absolutely robbed. The thing with Mark Stone, I mean, even on the nights where he's not really all over the score sheet, you still notice him so much, right? I mean, great screen on the one goal there. Obviously, I thought actually he might have tipped it, but it looked like it just kind of got underneath him. But I mean, those guys just are buzzing. I mean, that's the other part. I mean, they have so much confidence, and the value you touched on, the young players of Montreal. They have some guys with experience, but I mean, going to the conference final, the value of going to the conference final 3 times in 4 years, it's so essential. And yes, there are pieces that have rolled through the lineup, and they've added guys like Pacioretty. Like, look at the guys they've added. Pacioretty, Petrangelo. They went out and got the best defenseman available. And because we have you here, Yorkie, I mean, Sean and I watched him a ton in the Central Division. We know what he can bring, but What do you think the value is for a guy like Shea Theodore, who, last year in the bubble, everything you're hearing about Theodore, now he's this Norris candidate. But when you have a guy that's young and growing, what do you think it meant for him, for his development, just because of how special a professional that Petrangelo is, and he can still impact the game in so many areas. He does all the hard things. He's not just an offensive guy. I mean, what do you think it meant for his development to have Petrangelo as that 1-2 tandem? I mean, for me, I think it's for Kelly McCrimmon. He thought it was being back in junior. You basically are in a situation where you can have one guy or the other on the ice for 30 minutes at a time, and guess what? If you're chasing the game, put them both on together.
Yeah, no, I have to correct an earlier statement I made in our show here. I said Alex Tuch was arguably the best player. I actually think Alex Petrangelo was the best player in this game. And
I totally agree.
And everybody was talking about the points that were scored on the back end. And I used to always say stats are for losers, but now we have analytics, so we could use those as well. But Petrangelo, I thought he was the best player on the ice. He didn't have a point in today's game. He had 7 shots on goal. Played 25 minutes, but don't you just get that feeling when he's on the ice? It's just everything slows down. He has the puck. He dictates what's going to happen when he's on the ice, and that's just experience. It's from winning a Stanley Cup. Obviously, he's a highly skilled guy, but he never tries to do too much. And sometimes he'll surprise you like he did in that last series against Colorado. All of a sudden, he jumps in, scores that one off the backboards on the nice ricochet, but I just think he's really helped put Theodore in a better position. Because to me, Shea Theodore, I don't really look at him as a real legitimate 1A defenseman. I think he's more of a 2. Could be a 1 on some weaker teams, but Alex Petrangelo, he is a number 1 defenseman. And that's something Vegas has always been missing. They've never had that legitimate guy like a Victor Hedman who can go out there and just be calm out there and still make those plays. And watching him tonight, boy, oh boy, any young defenseman should watch him play. I don't think he gets enough credit, Ken and Sean. He's just so under the radar. He's so good. He's so calm. And I just so impressed watching him play the game. He makes the game look easy, and in essence helps guys like Theodore, helps guys like Martinez, another guy who had a great game. McNabb was solid, but he sets the whole roster for where guys should be as far as the pecking order on the defensive unit goes. But Petrangelo, he's their number 1.
Ken and I had this conversation in the offseason, and I know it was kind of maybe pie in the sky, the idea of a guy like Alex Petrangelo coming to Winnipeg. But we had thought if the Jets were going to fix what they needed to do in the offseason, the best way to do it with one fell swoop is to get a guy like Alex Petrangelo, because of exactly what you're saying. He takes everyone, to your point about a guy like Shea Theodore, you put him at the top of the mountain and everyone just kind of slots down one spot right into where they should be and where they should be playing. But I couldn't agree with you more. I thought that I wrote it down on the paper here early in the game because I thought I want to talk about Alex Petrangelo and what he did out there. To me, everything that they spent on him to bring him in, and I know there was questions earlier on. Every time you sign a big contract, those questions happen as soon as a guy doesn't, get 80 points or out of the gate. But I just looked at him and I thought, Vegas went out in the offseason and they were looking to find something that made the difference for this team, something that took this team that has, gone to the conference finals 3 times in the last 4 years, went to the Stanley Cup final. They're looking for something that is going to put them over the top. And the guy they went and got to try and do that was Alex Petrangelo. And I saw that game here tonight and I saw that difference maker. You can see exactly what you're saying, Yorkie. It's not necessarily the points that he's putting up on the boards, but everything he does out there, like you said, slows the play down. And I just thought it created a scenario where every time he was out there, it seemed like Montreal was on their heels. I mean, that's a great hit by Romanoff to catch him like that. But it's one of those plays where if he doesn't catch him, Petrangelo's in there, and it's dangerous. That's a risk it all to catch that guy. But if you miss it, there's a bit of trouble coming there. And it just felt to me like Montreal, at every point that Alex Petrangelo was on the ice, they were on their heels. Ken, I'm guessing you feel the same because you wrote about Alex Petrangelo and what you thought he could do for the Jets in the offseason if they were able to land him.
Yeah, just an awesome leader, right? I mean, here's a guy who's a quiet leader, but he knows, as Jason said, I mean, he knows what it takes to win, which you can't place the monetary value of that. Until you put a banner up, you don't see it necessarily. A lot of it is behind the scenes, but that calming presence on the ice is just such an important quality. I mean, he kills penalties. He can run the top power play. I love that Vegas is one of the few teams that sometimes goes 2D on the power play because they're so skilled. You don't have to have a third. You don't have to have a fourth forward out there because guess what? You got two guys that can really bomb it, and they're smart and they can distribute the puck. I mean, his exits are so calm. He's almost never. He never feels like he's under siege. He's always calm with the puck. Even if he makes a mistake, he recovers. Even that same thing, that hit kind of, no big deal. That, some players get tentative after they get hit. He's still joining the rush. He knows when to get up. He knows when he has support, when a third guy is high, when he can lean on his partner, and all of those things. And I think another one of the big developments for Vegas guys, Braden McNabb struggled in the bubble for me. He really looked slow. It looked like he was maybe on the decline. He came back with an absolute vengeance this year. Having that kind of a physical presence on the back end is such an important quality. You saw it in the game against Colorado. His hit on Nichushkin when they had just started to kind of roll. I mean, things like that really get them going. And he's gotten back to playing that simple game, quick exits, smart plays. I really think that he's really helped. And we talked about Martinez before. Again, a guy that's won the Stanley Cup, ice water in his veins. Now he's scored big goals in his career, but he's still out there blocking shots. He's sacrificing. He does all the things that his teammates notice that, again, don't necessarily end up on the stat sheet. But their defense core, it's been such an interesting way that they've put it together. Adding a college free agent like Zach Whitecloud, he plays on the penalty kill. That's his role, right? That's where he can really get his minutes. Everyone feels like they're part of it with Vegas, and that's what I think is such an important part of their team identity and their cohesion, because everyone knows that they have to do their part of the job in order to have success, but everyone flourishes when those guys do their job.
Yorkie, you talked about Canadiens getting a bit of a hot start there, but as the game went on, clearly Vegas staked their claim on who is the better team, at least in that game. How much of that do you think, put yourself in that situation on one of those rosters, you're coming out of this unique scenario in which you're playing a team in the playoffs you've never really seen before. How much of that is feeling out? And if it was, how worried are you that the Canadiens faded as the game wore on?
I think for the Montreal Canadiens, if I'm a player on that team right now, I'm going to take solace in knowing that we came back in round one against the Toronto Maple Leafs. So you have that in your back pocket, that you came back against a very skilled team. The only thing that would worry me, and I would never admit this if I was on the team, is the Toronto Maple Leafs don't play the same style as the Vegas Golden Knights. And that's the thing that's kind of scary for this team. But they got a gritty bunch, and I think they'll rebound in game two. I think game two will be a lot closer. Like, you got a lot of old dogs in that room, like a Corey Perry and Eric Stahl, Gallagher. They'll calm the group down. It's one game. This series is far from over. Do I think Vegas is going to win? Yes, I do. I don't think every game is going to be, not that this was lopsided, but I think Vegas was the more dominant team. I just think they'll find a way. Montreal does. They've got a lot of good pieces. And from what I'm hearing, I think we're going to see Jeff Petrie back in this series sooner than later. And if they do get him back, that's going to make a world of difference, because guys are not playing the minutes they're supposed to right now. And he's going to really alleviate that off the rest of the group. And defense wins in the playoffs. And Petrie, to me, had a Norris Trophy-like season, and he'll help a ton once he gets back.
So, Ken, before you touch on that, Yorkie, I want you to give us your experience as a player in the league and give us an idea of, because we talk about that all the time, slotting guys in the right minutes. And when you lose a guy, especially from the top of the mountain, a guy you are talking about had a Norris-type season, give me an idea of the bind that puts the guys in who are in to cover those minutes. Because I know you talked about Ben Sherratt and thinking that he was playing too much. How does that play out, and how does it expose guys?
Well, guys love it, especially if you're in a contract year. The more minutes, the better if you're a player. You'll never see a player say, hey, I'm playing too much. You're never going to hear the words out of a player's mouth. it just taxes you. It just does. And it's the one thing about Sherratt, I love him. He's a battler. He's a grinder. I think he's played the best hockey of his career during this playoff run with the Montreal Canadiens. And I really didn't know he had this kind of sneaky skill where he holds onto the puck and makes some plays. Boy, there's a guy that could have helped the Jets back end. Oh, my God. Yeah. He, not that the Jets back end was bad, but it's just a guy that you just love how he plays. You love how he competes. He was going at it with Petrangelo in the game. It's just, it's part of the business. Injuries happen. You got to find a way to deal with them. Carey Price can help alleviate that stress a little bit, but you just get a little bit exposed. That's just the way it is, especially with your bottom pairing guys. But it's a lot of minutes. But Sherratt wasn't bad in this game. You get to a point where it's just, man, I got to go back and get the puck again. I'm in another foot race. I'm getting my head in the glass. I haven't seen Sherratt take this type of punishment all playoffs long. He's been giving it out, and that was the difference in this game. They were challenging guys like Weber. Joel Edmondson was far less affected in this game because it's real tough to bully another bully, and that to me is the interesting thing with this series. You got a lot of big men out there, and especially on the back end. It's I think we're in for a real entertaining series, guys.
And Vegas's forecheck is probably the most dominant opponent that they've faced, right? I mean, Toronto is more of an entry team, skilled team. They don't really bang you against the glass. Sure, Simmons and those guys in the fourth line can, but Toronto never really got their forecheck going against Montreal. And the Jets, we certainly know, did not really get their forecheck going very much in that series. And Vegas is just so good. They're just relentless the way they come at you. I'm very curious to see how they respond. I mean, I'm with you guys. I mean, for all the people saying the North sucks and they're just going to get steamrolled, I don't believe that for 1 second. I mean, no. I'm sorry. I mean, this was a tight game, and were it not for elite level goaltending, Montreal could have scored early, and then maybe that's a completely different game. But
for sure.
Let's also not forget Vegas. This is the first time they won Game 1, and they're still standing, right? They're still standing, 7 wins away from the Stanley Cup. So winning Game 1 is obviously important, but it's not the be-all, end-all. And I think it'll be interesting to see how the responses are. And now you have same thing. We have a great experience of a Pete DeBoer versus Dom Ducharme, who is, very good coach, but young, right? In terms of NHL experience, yes, he's coached important games, won a Memorial Cup, all those things. But the tactical stuff, the back and forth, and maybe you can get your line out against a different guy. Maybe you have to jug your lines a little bit. That's the other part. Lehkonen came in and did a great job after Evans was hurt, but you haven't had to really see a lot of in-game juggling from Montreal in the playoffs so far. So I'll be curious to see if they try to get a little bit different matchup manipulation as the series continues.
Do you know, Ken, do you know, guys, with playoffs, just with final thought on the one thing you're saying there, Ken, with Winnipeg and with Toronto, and it just didn't seem like, and I always call it early in a series, when you make a hit on a guy, it's like you're putting a deposit in the bank. And as the series goes on, the deposits keep adding up, and they add up, and all of a sudden you've got a lot of money in the bank, and you can do something. They never did that. They just never punished that defense, and that's how you win in the playoffs. How many times you see even the star players are hitting, and you go back to some of these series, and everyone's all upset that Connor McDavid's out of the playoffs and Austin Matthews out of the playoffs. Well, those guys don't know how to play playoff hockey yet, and they'll figure it out. They're young guys. Eventually they will, but you're not going to win until your entire team buys in. Look at the Islanders, Sean. Like, if you guys watch that series, that's like watching those. That's like a war watching those guys play. And again, another fourth line that just goes after you with Clutterbuck and Matt Martin and guys like Cizikas. It's just that's how you win in the playoffs. You don't win. Like, sure, your star players will score some goals for you here and there, but it's your foot soldiers, and that's the difference between hockey and other sports. And you can pay your star player $12 million, but it's the guys that make you a lot less that are going to help you win in the playoffs.
Yorkie, I'm glad you brought up the Islanders, because that style that they play, Matt Barzal last year is kind of the guy who stood out a little bit. As he came into the league as a point-per-game player, right? And then Barry Trotz, I had this interesting conversation with him where, he basically went to him and said, "Okay, you can do that, and you can do that for the rest of your career, and you're not going to win anything like that." He wanted to turn him into that complete, total player. He wants him to fast-forward the process and not be Steve Yzerman when 10 years into his career, when he realizes, I got to do this to win. He wants him to get there right from the start. And I think Matt Barzal last year, clearly wasn't there, clearly played a little bit of a lighter game. And we're kind of seeing, to your point about those guys like Austin Matthews, that they're going to get there. I feel like we're seeing that from Matt Barzal this season, like the change from what I saw of him in the bubble last year to the kind of grittiness that he's adding to his game, and fitting more and more in with that New York Islanders style really seems to, credit to Barry Trotz. One, he seems to set his teams up for success like no one else, but to get a buy-in from a player like that, that early in his career, when the kid had so much success as like a more than a point per game player. That's what you want when you come into the league, right? So I thought that was that I liked how he brought that up. I wanted to go back to Fleury quickly because you talked about that. It's interesting because we come into this series and one of these two goaltenders is a Vezina Trophy candidate. One of them has won multiple Stanley Cups. And that goaltender, I think, was the guy who you weren't hearing as much about coming into this series. So much was made about Price. The aura that surrounds Price is something else. And, hey, nothing against Price. He had a phenomenal game here tonight. But I do really think that starting out of the gate, Fleury had, made those saves that kind of kept that from being an early lead and the Canadiens being able to try and their clamp down style. Ken, what kind of attitude do you think Fleury had coming into this series? Do you think any kind of conversation about Price made him more motivated in this series?
Yeah, he's so internally motivated, and even too, he was asked about it in his Zoom call again, and he felt as though, he said it flat out, I don't feel like I'm playing against Price. I have to worry about the shooters. He said all the right things, but we all know what's going on here. There needs to be a starting goalie for Team Canada at the Olympics. Marc-Andre Fleury wants to be that goalie. He knows everybody's talking about Price as being the starter, and rightfully so with a great playoff. But Fleury wants to be in that conversation. I don't think he would ever say it publicly. And his ultimate goal is winning the cup. But players are like him want to be considered the number one goalie in the league. They want to be the starter for Team Canada. And if you didn't, you wouldn't be in the NHL and you wouldn't be an elite player. So I loved what he said. He said all the right things. He talked about Brendan Gallagher, he didn't complain at all. I know Gallagher well. I expect him to come. It's part of the game. He's not going to get I love the fact that he went out swinging on one of the scrums, but I love his intensity. He's always been he has such a positive demeanor, but this guy has a great fire in his belly. He wants to be the best at his position, and he wants to get on the cup again and help Vegas. This is a guy who is, Vegas has made him the face of the franchise. What he's gone through in the last 18 months or whatever it was, his ability to bounce back and get his first Vezina nomination in the year after he lost his starting job, that tells you everything you need to know about Marc-Andre Fleury. He could have wilted, he could have demanded a trade, but guess what? He wanted to stay with the franchise that basically made him the marquee player. I love everything about Marc-Andre Fleury, and for sure he's internally motivated by wanting to win a goalie battle, even though he's not going to say it publicly. He has other things in mind, but for sure he knows what people are saying, but he also knows people are talking about him because he had to play great in order to knock out Colorado. And to me, this goes back to so many people were saying, oh, what is Vegas doing not starting Fleury in game one? This was all meant to protect Marc-Andre Fleury, not just because of his age and whatever else. Vegas knew that they were going to be a bit flat after going 7 games at the Wild, and protecting him helped him keep his confidence level at such a high place. And at the end, it was the right call. It's easy to say afterward that it, potentially couldn't have worked out, but I loved how they handled him. I loved how Fleury's responded, and I think he's just getting started. He got so close last time in 2018. He wants to win another cup.
Yorkie, you talked about Alex Petrangelo really standing out for you. If you're looking at the other side of the ice, who did you need to see more from if you're the Montreal Canadiens?
In tonight's game, that's a good question. I look at that lineup. Kulak's a veteran guy, and you talk about when opportunity arises and you have a player out of the game, and it's only one play, but he's a guy that probably has to step up a little bit more on that blue line when you have a guy like Petrie out. You got Weber, who was battling some sort of hand injury in the game. You saw him wincing a little bit after that one play. But, the group up front, I still think for Josh Anderson, he's far too inconsistent in my books. I'll take a little bit of what Elliot Friedman said on the broadcast tonight. He made a great comparable to Alex Tuck. Both of those players are on the third line. One player is playing a lot better than the other one, and that's Alex Tuck versus Josh. And it's every shift Alex Tuck is creating where you can shift. I think talking about that.
Oh, I think we're losing Yorkie here.
Oh.
Yeah, I think we're sorry, Yorkie. We're losing you. There we go. You're back. No, I think we're losing Yorkie here. Maybe cut out Yorkie and click back in. We'll see if we can't fix that up. Ken, who did you need to see more out of if you're the Canadiens?
Well, right through the lineup. I mean, I didn't mind. They certainly had a great first period, but they were unable to sustain it. So, I mean, in order for them to get rolling, they're a team that has to have production throughout the lineup. I mean, Vegas got that today. They had contributions from everyone, and even, I thought their fourth line was excellent. So, Perry was involved, but he didn't have as much 5-on-5 ice time when they were chasing the game. And I mean, their young guys are there. I mean, again, we know this is learning time, but they need their young guns to be clicking on all cylinders. And when they're not, then it can be a challenge for them. Then they need their veterans to go. But yeah, I agree with Yorkie. I mean, Joel Edmondson, Manitoba product. He had a great series against the Jets. I noticed him a few times with the hits, but I didn't notice him as much. And in a game where they were missing Petrie, I thought that their defense core as a whole needed to be a little bit better. But their forward group has to be better too. I mean, I don't think they were, this is a different situation. Let's not kid ourselves. They went 448 minutes and change without trailing a game. So 20 full days without having to chase a game. Like we watched the Winnipeg Jets have to chase every game against Montreal. Chasing the game is hard. It opens you up to allowing scoring chances you don't want to give up, right? And that's, and when that happens, it can be a challenge for everybody. And I think the Montreal Canadiens have shown pretty well that they know what it takes to bounce back, and we know Vegas has done a great job of rolling, and they've had to deal with their own adversity. So nobody's declaring this one over. I mean, we should always go back to people were ready to award the Avalanche the cup after 2 games of the playoffs. So things can change. Nothing is permanent in the playoffs, but a great start for Vegas. Montreal will be looking for some answers, and I think, too, let's dig into maybe a little bit of the game yesterday. I mean, Jason talked about the Islanders. I actually kind of felt, Sean, that I thought that Tampa, I'm looking for the right word. Maybe arrogant is too strong, but I felt that they were a little bit too arrogant in terms of their puck management. This was a team that hasn't been pushed necessarily the same way earlier on. Yeah, they had a couple tough series at times, but I thought the Islanders did a great job of forcing Tampa into making turnovers that they just should not have been making. And same thing, we talked about Vegas being relentless. The Islanders are relentless, and man, they were swarming with their opportunities in that game yesterday afternoon. And I was just so impressed by what the Islanders were able to do. And they fed Tampa fed into that a little bit, but I love the way that series is shaping up, and everyone, a lot of people thought that Tampa would just roll in that series too. But the Islanders have a very deep team. They're getting good goaltending, and we talked about defense core, Vegas defense core. The Islanders defense core has been just outstanding in these playoffs, right? I mean, Ryan Pulock, obviously big goal, but the job that he's been doing with Matt Pelech has just been awesome to watch on the back end there.
Well, Yorkie, we've transitioned quickly, and we're talking a little bit of Islanders series here. But
hey, fellas,
I mean,
welcome back. You sound a lot better.
If there was any arrogance on the part of the Tampa Bay Lightning going into playing that first game against the New York Islanders, that would be crazy. Because
sorry, and what I meant is I wasn't saying that they were underestimating the Islanders. I just think they were arrogant in terms of their puck management.
And I totally agree. And it's an egregious mistake, because this, we know about this Islanders team that they're a tough out. Like, the one thing that you should know if you're heading into a series against the New York Islanders is it's going to be a battle. And these two teams last year, I had the privilege of covering this series in the bubble, and the Islanders finish up their series. I think they go 7 games. They got to hop on a plane. They got to fly across the country from one bubble to the next when they shut down the Eastern bubble to continue things in Edmonton. That first game's an 8-2 blowout, because New York is clearly tired. But I mean, other than that, it's kind of a coin toss the rest of that series along the way. And it's, I mean, if I'm Tampa, there's no way I'm feeling that, we handled this Islanders team in the playoffs last year. And the one thing that I just think is a terrifying thought is to have the Terminator eyes of Barry Trotz scanning my team and looking for weaknesses for a second straight year in a row. I mean, I've got to think, if I'm John Cooper and if I'm, the guys who know what's going on that roster, you got to think that you are going to be facing a near perfect game plan against this New York Islanders team, because, I mean, they've shown nothing less over the last couple of years. Yorgi, what did you see in that first game?
With the Islanders?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, with Barry Trotz, he is fooling everybody. He is one of the nicest men you'll ever meet. He's like a big puppy dog. He's all bark and no bite, but he's a tremendous coach. I had the pleasure of playing for him, Ken, for 2 years in Nashville. And here's what he does. And you mentioned with Matt Barzal, and I wanted to go back, that thing you said earlier, Sean, what he did with Barzal. Trotzy challenged him, and he really brought out the player that he could be sooner than later. And everybody knows the story of Steve Yzerman. And I don't want to pick on certain players in NHL, but one thing that really bothered me in the playoffs earlier, it was in the Edmonton series. There's a particular play when McDavid got off the ice, and he looked back at his coach, and then after that, there's a certain player that wasn't on his line for the rest of the game. Stuff like that doesn't happen with the New York Islanders. Nobody thinks they're better than the team. Everybody is of equal footing. Listen, players aren't stupid. They know who the best players are, but they don't need another player humiliating them in front of their teammates. And I just, you're not going to win until that type of BS goes away. And that's why Edmonton's not going to win until certain players change their attitudes. But for Barry Trotz, he doesn't tolerate stuff like that. And Matt Barzal, he spent time on the fourth line this year. I even think he might have been healthy a couple times last year, guys. Like, he has a way of getting to players and bringing out the best of them. And players appreciate it. Even though he's being hard on them, you know it's for your own good as a player. He did it to me for a couple of games, and you appreciate the honesty, and there's no BS with Barry Trotz, and no single person is bigger than the team. And I see that with some of the star players in the league, and you're not going to win until that goes away. And for the Islanders, they're not the most talented team, but Barry Trotz is squeezing them like a sponge and getting everything he can out of that team. And it's not because he's a good coach, guys. His assistant coaches do all the tactical stuff. Barry deals with personalities. That's what he specializes in. He's like a shrink, and he knows the buttons to push. And he's done a beautiful job with Matt Barzal, because Matt Barzal, and you heard it from him in his post-game interview, he's not trying to score that pretty goal when they're up. He's playing the team system. He's not looping in his own zone and waiting to cheat on offense. Nobody cheats in the New York Islanders. Just like the Vegas Golden Knights, just like the Montreal Canadiens. Nobody cheats on those hockey teams, because if you do cheat, you're not going to play. And it's as simple as that. And that's what I love about Barry Trotz, and that's what guys love who play for Barry Trotz. Nobody's bigger than the team, and that's why the guy has success.
We're going to bring in Eric Engels right now, but I need to ask you something before we get to Eric, because I want to ask his take on the game. Just going to say welcome to Eric Engels. And Eric, we're going to get to you right in a second. But Yorkie, I want you to build on that, because Ken and I always kind of have this, not argument with it, but this debate. You were coached by Paul Maurice Jr. in Windsor. And you were coached in Nashville by Barry Trotz. And we talk about these kind of different styles. One thing, and you'll know this about Paul Maurice, he never challenges his players in the media. It's not his style. If he's going to handle anything, he's going to handle it in that house. The one thing I noticed early with Barry Trotz is that, I asked him about Matt Barzal earlier on, and all the stuff that you're talking about, he said out loud in front of everybody. And I always got the take from him. He has these conversations about this guy. He's not playing his best hockey right now. But you get this sense with the way that Barry Trotz handles it, that he can say those things out loud, one, because he's already said it to the players, but two, he shows this confidence in the player that they're going to get out of it. So it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to bring it into the media because we've talked about it, we've got a plan, and we're going to get through it. Like, is that your experience with him when you were in Nashville?
Yeah, and there's a difference between talking about a player in the media, Sean, and embarrassing a player in the media. He's not trying to embarrass the player. He's just brutally honest, and he's got no qualms and no problems being that way. And that's a player. You just want to know where you stand, and he's already had that conversation with the players, so it's no secret. And he's not saying anything the player doesn't know, and that's the way you want it. And that's the way it should be. So, and that's why Barry has success, guys. Look at Eric. I haven't seen you in a while, man. What's going on?
I'm doing good, Yorkie. It's good to hear your voice and good to see you.
We're Team Hat on the show here. We both got the ball cap. Late night here on the Eastern Time Zone.
Exactly. Hey, Eric, let's get to you because we don't want to keep you guys up too late. But what were your major takeaways from tonight?
My biggest one, and I just finished writing a column about it at sportsnet.ca, which should be out soon, is how glaring the absence of Jeff Petrie was in this game. And, it really, against a team like the Golden Knights, which is so deep and so talented and so punishing up front, but specifically on a night where their defensemen combined for 7 points and 18 shots from the blue line. And the dynamic that exists on Montreal's blue line where their top four log so much minutes, and they've done such a good job keeping players away from Carey Price and generating offense themselves, specifically against the Jets. All it took was a couple of mistakes from the weaker links on that blue line. And sure enough, this game, fell out of reach for the Canadiens. And yes, they took a bunch of penalties that gave the Golden Knights momentum in the game. But it really happened in the first period where they were playing a great first period. Erik Gustafsson at 5-on-5 thinks he's got a bit more time than he does to make a play, and he forces Ben Sherratt into taking an icing. And Ben Sherratt's playing on the right side on that shift, out of position. It takes that icing, and then Gustafsson on the ensuing faceoff isn't able to clear the front of the net and ends up screening Carey Price, and the puck goes in. This is not to blame Erik Gustafsson for this loss. It's just to point out that with a guy like Petrie, you're not shuffling guys into the wrong spots, into areas where they don't belong. And, it really brought me back to the trade deadline where I think Marc Bergevin really knew that this was going to be an area that he needed to improve his team, and the players were just not available to him to be able to do it. And that's why he ended up with guys like John Merrill and Erik Gustafsson. So I thought it was a good night to bring all that up.
You mentioned the penalties. Was that an example of the Canadiens playing careless, or did they get forced into those penalties?
Yeah, I think it was just the ebb and flow of the game, a bit of the aggression on Vegas' side. One thing leads to the next in this game. Momentum, as we often talk about, such a critical factor at playoff time. And, it slid against the Canadiens. They lost their composure on a couple of the calls, and they paid for it. And not in goals immediately, but the momentum that you can generate with the power play and disrupt what Montreal needs to do, because we know what the recipe is for success for this team. It's you get a lead, but you're not guaranteed to get a lead even if you have a good start. They accomplished their first goal, which was getting a good start, and even the goal that got scored in the first period didn't set them back on their heels. I didn't think they changed the way they played in that first period after it was scored. But you get to the box, you take away your biggest weapon, which is rolling four lines and coming with a balanced attack and keeping the pressure up. And it got away from them. And the Golden Knights are an excellent team playing with the lead, just like the remaining teams that are in these playoffs. And so it's just the way the events went. But I return to it. I think this was much more about what the Canadiens didn't have in this game and Jeff Petrie than it was what they did.
I want all three of your opinions on this. Canadians started that game. You mentioned the hot start that they got. That was check number one. Weren't a lot of checks after that. But I watched them at the start of that game, and I was seeing a very similar outcome and to what I saw in that series against the Montreal Canadiens. What changed, Eric? What did Vegas figure something out here, or did Montreal stop doing what they needed to do?
I think it's a little bit of both. When you surrender that momentum and you're not able to get to your game plan of rolling those four lines, it's going to hurt against the Vegas team that's deep at every position. Marc-Andre Fleury played great off the hop, gave Vegas a chance to get themselves into the game. But you look at the defense joining and the way they were able to disrupt things in front of Carey Price for really the first time since Game 4 against the Maple Leafs. And even so, I mean, Toronto, they scored a lot counterattacking. They didn't have a great presence in front of Price in the first round, and the Jets never got in front of them. So, I just think Vegas really took care of the details of the game and the things you need to do to win at this time of year. And the Canadiens and Dominic Ducharme are going to really have to go back to the drawing board, because even if Petrie can draw in here, he's going to be playing with a fair degree of pain and probably incapable of doing certain things that are key to his game. And it becomes complicated from this point forward. The way this game went and the confidence with which the Golden Knights are playing, they're a formidable opponent. Everyone knew that going into this series. I think the Canadiens can play a lot better. They showed it within the first period, and I think they're not going to be rattled with the veteran presence they have in their room, that they're going to come back with a better effort. But they need every single guy going. It's not as simple as they can have their best players play well, and if the other guys don't toe the line, they're not going to win.
Yorkie, Eric brought it up there. I had heard the Canadiens players in the post game and said they showed that they could play with that team in the first period. Is that enough if you're a player in that room to build confidence off of a start that you had when everything else kind of went south from there?
I think so, and Eric brought up a point. They got into some penalty trouble, and what that does, even though Vegas had a couple power plays that didn't work out that well, it gets everybody out of the rhythm. It gets that fourth line from getting in the rotation regularly, and Montreal's a four-line team. They need to roll that way. For me, they need to stay out of the box, because it just disrupts their whole game plan, gets guys out of the flow. And I was actually going to tweet this out tonight, Eric. Watching the Montreal Canadiens without Jeff Petrie, it's just not the same hockey team. He's their Alex Petrangelo. He's the guy that transitions the play. He calms it down. He's got the puck on his stick every single time he's on the ice. They don't have that when he's out of the lineup. And another guy I thought that kind of struggled tonight was Kulak. It'll be interesting to see what happens with him, Eric. They're going to have a decision to make, because they got Gustafsson that they use on their power play. And I didn't mind Romanov in tonight's game. I think he was -1, -2, but he was physical. Like, that's something that I think is going to be real handy in this series. And I wouldn't be surprised if Kulak might be the guy that draws out when it's all said and done. But I don't see how they take Romanov out of the lineup. I really don't.
I'll jump in on that thought, Jason, really quick. Couple things. One of the reasons why Brett Kulak was a scratch 10 times this year was because of the fact that they didn't like him on the right side. And that's where he ended up for most of this game, because I think, even though Dominic Ducharme didn't want to get into it when I asked him, I think he really wanted to make sure that Edmondson was going to be on the left side, especially with Stone and Tuck and those guys attacking from the right. Big factor, but also another factor was the way they had to roll their duos and mix and match certain guys. Romanov is a guy who, from the beginning of the season, Ducharme said, or since he took over, that he much prefers on the left side. He just feels you get the best out of his game, and that's where he played for most of this game, and I agree with you. He played really well. What'll be really interesting, and Jason, you came to know this player a little bit, will the Canadiens turn to Cale Fleury, a natural right-handed side player. Obviously, they're not going to roll him out playing heavy minutes when he hasn't played a single playoff game. In fact, he hasn't played a single game with the Canadiens this season. He played with the Laval Rocket the entire season, but he's a big, physical, fast, mobile, smart defenseman who plays a simple game. And I think he would offer probably a better outcome than Gustafsson will at 5-on-5. It's tough to take Gustav Sennell with what he's contributed to the power play, but against this Vegas team, you can't try to beat them with 3 defensemen. So this is going to be really interesting over the next couple of days. I think Petrie is likely to draw in on Wednesday, but if he can't, Ducharme has a really complicated decision on his hands.
Yeah, Yorkie believes that we're going to see Petrie in the next game. Ken, if that happens, where do you think he makes the biggest difference?
Well, just these guys have already touched on it. I mean, you play them so much, and then you can shelter the other guys on the third pairing because we know they don't play them together a ton, right? I mean, their ability to throw them out there with Weber or Petrie really helps protect those guys and allow them to play on the left side at the same time. Let's not forget. I mean, Montreal won 7 games in a row. They're not gonna be going home moping and thinking they have no chance. I mean, this is a group that's beat 2 pretty good teams to get where they are. So. Sometimes teams need a reset. I mean, they never would say they would, but it just kind of gets you back in terms of being back on your plan and back on track. And we've all touched on it and talked about it. The inability to get to that 4-line game really got the Canadiens out of their rhythm, and that was something they couldn't really recover from. And it's tough when we've talked about that 4th line. They're all veterans. It's tough to keep your legs. At least for Armia, he's able to get on the penalty kill, but. I mean, when the 4th line's not going, it's tough to stay as sharp as they've been, and they're so good at protecting the lead, and they weren't able to be quite as aggressive at their defensive blue line, and they didn't create as many turnovers as we're used to seeing. So I think there'll be a couple subtle tweaks, but they'll be ready to go for game 2. And, Price always responds. I mean, he played great tonight, but, I mean, he hasn't given up four goals in almost, 20, 30 days almost. So, he's going to be great again. I think... they'll learn from their mistakes in game 1. They'll protect the puck a little better. They'll be a little more disciplined, and should be a really fun game for game 2.
Yeah, well, it's starting to build a little bit of a theme here in our chat room. People suggesting that the North Division is a fraud. I guess we're going to get a look at it and see if they can kind of bounce back in game 2. I mean, I got to say, as Vegas got stronger and stronger and stronger as that game went on, I was wondering if the Canadiens just thought they didn't have it tonight and were letting it go, or I was wondering if there wasn't an answer, which would be concerning. But either way, we'll get a look at what happens in game 2. Yorkie, it was great to catch up with you. We'd love to have you going forward if you were available. I know it'll get a little easier when the series shifts back to Montreal and it's not so late at night. And Eric, I know you got a ton of work that you got to do before you get here. We really appreciate you making the time, and I'm looking forward to seeing you very soon, my friend, as we'll work together and do this out of the Bell Center in Montreal. And Ken, as always, it's always great to spend time with you. If we're not doing this, we're on the phone with each other, so we might as well go do this anyway. And our chat room, always great to have you chipping in and driving the conversation. Really appreciate that. Thanks, everyone. We will see you after game 2.